Do you believe an airplane can disappear from thin air? This is exactly what happened on March 8, 2014, where 239 people were on board and completely disappeared from radar. Bonjour Hi my loves, I hope you're doing well, I hope you're doing fine. So in today's episode, I will talk about everything on the Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370's disappearance, the circumstances, and the conspiracy theories related to it. So buckle up, because this case is overall really strange. So let's start with the facts, but unfortunately there aren't many of them. So on March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:42 a.m. bound for Beijing, China. A Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew, most of them Chinese nationals. The flight should have been routine, only 6 hours long. But what unfolded next would turn into one of the greatest aviation mysteries of our time. Less than an hour after takeoff, at 1:19 a.m., the plane made its last voice transmission to Malaysian Air Traffic Control. It was a simple message from the co-pilot, "Goodbye Malaysian 370. Just 2 minutes later, the plane's transponder, the system that communicates with ground radar, was turned off. The flight vanished from civilian radar screens. At first, Malaysian Air Traffic Control assumed the flight had continued as scheduled, but it hadn't. The plane, in fact, took a sharp westward turn, crossing back over the Malaysian peninsula, then heading south across the Indian Ocean. Now this is where things get weird. Military radar briefly tracked the plane after it disappeared from civilian radar, but after 2:22 a.m., it was gone completely. For nearly an hour, no one realized the flight was missing. It was only when the plane failed to make contacts with Vietnamese air traffic control or arrive in Beijing as scheduled that alarms started going off. What followed was one of the largest search operations in aviation history. Governments from all over the world, led by Australia, Malaysia, and China, scoured thousands of miles of the Indian Ocean, focusing on an area that satellite data suggested might have been the plane's final resting place. But despite years of searching and millions of dollars spent, the main wreckage of flight MH370 has never been found. Only small pieces of debris, like parts of the wing, washed as whore on distant islands years later, confirming that the plane likely crashed into the ocean. But how and why? To this day, the answers remain frustratingly elusive. Now let's talk about the conspiracy theories. First up is the remote hijacking theory. This theory suggests that flight MH370 was remotely hacked and taken over by unknown people. Some proponents of this theory point to modern planes being almost entirely computerized, with the possibility of external control. They believe that either the government or a tech-savvy terrorist group took controls of the plane's systems and redirected it. Of course, there's no hard evidence of this, and aviation experts are quickly to point out how difficult it would be to hack into an aircraft remotely. And honestly, when there's expert debunking a conspiracy theories, I tend to, of course, believe them automatically because they're the ones who know better than us. Then there's the Diego Garcia theory. This one suggests that MH370 was secretly flown to the US military base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, which was the last place that the plane was known to have flown. The base is a highly strategic location for US operations, and some conspiracy theorists believe that the plane was either intentionally diverted there because it was carrying sensitive cargo, or that it was mistakenly shot down by the military. I honestly think that this is a little bit too far-fetched. Yes, the location of the island and where the plane was last seen is kind of a big coincidence, but I don't think, maybe it's a hot take, maybe not, but maybe it's surprising to hear from me that the US government is not behind every single weird thing that's going on in the world. And if it was the case, I believe that they would like take the plane's debris and put it somewhere else, so that, and maybe give a tip to like the Malaysian police or government to look at the place that they moved out the plane's debris, so that they can have a final, they can finally close the case, and the families can kind of like put their minds at rest and kind of be able to close this chapter of their lives, because it's been what, 10 years, and the families of the victims still have no answers, and it must be so horrible for them, because how the fuck does a plane disappear? Like I feel like it's like such a big transportation that you don't think that it can disappear. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And I feel like if it was like the US military who accidentally shot the plane, they would at least want to do that so that they could close the case, you know? But I really don't believe in this conspiracy theory. The next conspiracy theory is again about the alien abduction theory. Some theorists claim that MH370 was taken by extraterrestrial beings. The rationale here is simple: no wreckage, no distress calls, and no trace of the passengers or crew. Could that mean they were abducted? Despite no credible evidence supporting alien involvement, it's an idea that continues to pop up online. Again, I don't believe in this theory, because not every conspiracy theory, not every weird thing again that's happening in the world is the result of aliens, you know? And I feel like we're overhyping aliens way too much with peace and love. Like, maybe they're not as strong and powerful and high tech as we think. And why would they take a fucking plane? Like, it just doesn't make sense. I really don't believe in this one. The next theory is the Russian involvement theory that also gained traction, suggesting that MH370 was hijacked by Russian agents. This theory is tied to the geopolitical climate of 2014. Particularly, some believe that Russian operatives were behind the disappearance, possibly to steal technology or target certain passengers. This theory gained momentum after MH370, another Malaysian Airlines flight, was shut down over Ukraine just a few months later. Honestly, from all the conspiracy theories that I've talked on so far, so the remote hijacking theory, the Diego Garcia theory, and the alien abduction, I feel like this one is the more plausible, because a few months later another flight was shut down over Ukraine. Like, coincidences like this aren't really coincidences, but why, how would they again make a whole plane disappear and whole passengers disappears without leaving any trace? I feel like, yeah, maybe the Russian government, or not maybe, they are really powerful and sometimes scary, but I feel like they're not fucking like magicians and completely like making sure that there is no evidence left behind. And knowing that the MH370 flight was only a 6 hours long flight, and the people, the government, and the Malaysian airport really started to realize that something wrong was going on 6 hours after the flight, because they realized that the flight was late and no message was left by the pilot. So that's when they realized something was going on. And knowing that the last message that the pilot left was an hour after the plane started going off, so it would have left 5 hours for the Russian government to like cause trouble and like clean up everything. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's kind of weird, don't get me wrong, that a couple months later they shut down a plane from the same airline, but I don't fully believe in this theory. And the final theory is the black hole theory, or the time travel theory. Some people think that MH370 flew into a black hole or was transported through time, but physics experts have been quick to debunk this idea. This theory and the disappearance of flight MH370 has actually inspired the popular Netflix show Manifest, which basically that's like the whole plot line of the show. But everything that has to do with like time traveling and like black holes and like parallel universe I swear, like, tell me if y'all are the same, but every time I start to think about these types of theories, my mind just goes nuts because I'm like, what the hell? Like, one day I could be like walking down the street and like accidentally go into another universe. Like, that's crazy insane. That's crazy insane! To be more logic and based on the little facts that we have, I don't believe in the time travel or black hole theory, at least for the MH370 flight's disappearance. Given the lack of concrete evidence, there are a few official theories that have been proposed by investigators, but none of them are fully proven. One of the most widely accepted explanation is the hypnoxia theory. Hypnoxia is when the cabin loses pressure and both the passengers and the crew can lose consciousness. In this theory, it's thought that the plane could have continued flying on autopilot for hours until it ran out of fuel and crashed into the Indian Ocean. The final report released by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau in 2017 seemed to lean towards this explanation, suggesting that the pilots may have been incapacitated due to lack of oxygen, leading the plane to fly off course. And for the hypnoxia theory, I kinda do believe in it, but there's another theory later on that I will talk to you guys about that sadly I think it is true. Another explanation could be mechanical failure. Perhaps the plane experienced some kind of catastrophic failure, electrical, structural, or even fire related, and both the communication systems and the pilots were disabled. But if that was the case, how did the plane manage to fly for another 7 hours without contacting anyone? I'm not a full believer of this explanation, to be honest. Another explanation could be related to terrorist hijacking, because in the days after MH370's disappearance, it was discovered that 2 passengers on the plane had boarded the plane with stolen passports. However, these individuals were later cleared of suspicions and determined to be asylum seekers and not terrorists. And the final theory, which I think is the explanation of the plane's disappearance, and it really makes me sad because this whole theory, it is, it's still a theory at the end of the day, and it's still people who lost their lives, and I hope it is not true, but I think with all of the researches that I've made is actually the case. And it's kind of weird because I've always been watching conspiracy theories in general, and I've never really was convinced in a particular theory until I read this conspiracy theory on the whole Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370's disappearance. When I read this theory, I was like, this is so sure it's this one because it just makes sense. But again, I want to still make clear that it's a theory. I could be 100,000% wrong, and I'm saying this theory with so much respect for the families who have been impacted by the people who have lost their lives in this flight. So the last theory that I fully believe on is that the flight disappeared because of the pilot's suicide. So the pilot was Captain Zahari Ahmed Sah, so sorry for if I botched his name. He was the lead pilot on this flight, and he has been at the center of this theory for multiple reasons. So some investigators believe that Zahari intentionally diverted the plane off course. It was reported that a flight simulator was found at his home, had routes programmed similar to the one MH370 took. While these routes weren't exact replicas of the path that the plane took, they fueled speculations that Zahari may have rehearsed the flight path. I don't really believe that this is a strong argument to support, to be honest, this theory that it was a pilot suicide, only because I feel like pilots in general, it's normal for them to have flight simulators at their home to practice, to make sure that they got the flight right, that they got the right techniques and stuff. So I don't think there should be suspicions to be made why he has a flight simulator at his home. To support my opinion, I feel like if even his flight simulator, let's say there were exactly replicas of the MH370's like path, wouldn't we know where the plane is if you follow the path of his flight simulator? So that's why I don't fully believe in this argument supporting the pilot's suicide. So another argument that is made about why the pilot may have committed suicide and also mass killings of the passengers is about mental health. Knowing that mental health symptoms are actually common in airline pilots and getting help can highly affect actually, their ability to work again. To be more precise, airline pilots are required to meet certain medical standards in order to maintain an active flying status, and disclosing a new symptom or condition to the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) puts them at risk of losing, usually temporary, their ability to work and fly. This is particularly true for mental health symptoms. The FAA forbids pilots from the cockpit if they report seeking regular talk therapy for even mild anxiety or depression. This may last for months and sometimes even for years, based on the assumption they pose an unacceptable risk to safety, which at the same time it makes sense to not have a pilot who have severe or even mildly symptoms of depression, anxiety, or any mental health symptoms. It makes sense for the safety of the passengers and the crew. But at the same time, what pilots would do if they feel like they don't really feel good mentally, they don't want to necessarily lose their job even temporarily. So that's why they would lie, and that's why they will not seek help, because they want to keep their jobs. And even more, knowing that in Malaysia, in the culture, it's really taboo to talk about mental health. Unfortunately, it's still not as accepted as it is here in the West. And also, it is taboo in the culture to talk about suicide or even talk about this case being a theory. It seems that the Malaysian government doesn't want to consider this theory because of how much taboo these subjects are in the culture. So you may think that maybe Zahari had mental health problems and didn't want to seek the necessarily help because he didn't want to lose his job even temporarily. So maybe he was in a difficult financial situation, right? After I've made my researches, it appeared that Zahari and his wife and family were actually really comfortable. They had the means, they had the money, he had 2 houses. So if he really had mental health problems, he wouldn't see a problem in taking a break temporarily from his job to seek the medical help. But because it is taboo back there and it's kind of frowned upon, maybe that's why potentially he didn't seek help, which is still super irresponsible. Don't get me wrong, it is the pilot's duty to make sure that he is in a good state of mind to have on his hands the lives of passengers and his crew. Reports from his wife and his daughter makes us realize that this theory is probably true. So his wife, Faiza, had allegedly informed investigator that he retreated into a shell, spending time alone in his room in the house they shared. So that was before he went on his last flight. No suicide note has been found and no motive established. Quoting a source close to the pilot's family, it is reported that Faiza, his wife, told investigators that Mr. Zahari had stopped speaking to her and spent time alone in his room with the flight simulator. And even his daughter told the investigators that her last conversation with her father was a lot different to those they shared before. So she said, "He wasn't the father I knew. He seemed disturbed and lost in a world of his own." And apparently there were other revelations from unnamed source where they said that Mr. Zahari was on the brink of divorcing his wife after nearly 30 years of marriage, and there's even some cheating rumors going on. So even with all these official theories, none of them provide a full, satisfying explanation of what happened. So even today, more than a decade later, after MH370 disappearance, the world is still searching for answers. Families of the victims continue to push for renewed search efforts, and while the official investigation has been closed, some independent researchers are still hunting for evidence that might bring closure. Will we ever know the truth about the MH370 disappearance? I really don't know. But I hope that at least we will find it soon. That's what I hope for the family's closure. So that's for today's episode. I hope that I explained well this conspiracy theory without disrespecting the families of the victims in any way, shape, or form. And on that note, I hope you like this podcast episode enough to subscribe, give it a like. I hope you have a beautiful night of sleep. I love you. Take care. Au revoir.